Chapter 8. Inspector Roland. Well, said Inspector Roland, coming into the room. Mr. Fame. Hello, Inspector, said Fame. What can we do for you? You can stay where you are, said the inspector. There were 4 policemen with the inspector, and one of them was a very tall man. He was holding a large gun. He stood by the door and kept the gun pointing at Fame. Zara and Don. Excuse me, Inspector, said Don. But this is my house. Shut up, said Inspector Roland. The other 3 policemen began to search the place. One of them crossed the yard to the shed. One of them walked around the yard, and the other began searching Don's house. The tall man stayed by the door pointing the large gun. A clock on the wall above the rocking chair ticked loudly. Fame looked at Zara. Zara looked at Fame. They both looked at Don. All 3 looked at the inspector and the man with the gun. Nobody said anything. Everything was silent in the house, except for the clock. After a few minutes, Fame spoke to the inspector. What are they looking for? He asked. No answer. What are they looking for, Inspector? Fame asked again. Shut up, said the inspector. All right, said Fame, and he was silent for half an hour. They sat in the cool room. Zara looked straight ahead of her. Don finished one cigar and lit another one, and Fame tapped his fingers on the wooden table. Don't do that, said the inspector suddenly. Don't do what? Asked Fame. Don't tap your fingers on the table, said the inspector. Sorry, said Fame and stopped tapping. Just then, one of the men came in from the yard. Inspector, shouted the policeman. There are 2 cars in the shed, said the man. Shall I search them? I'll search them myself, said the inspector, and he went out with the man. Fame looked at Don and raised his eyebrows. Don shook his head. The very tall policeman with the gun looked suspiciously from Don to Fame, and his finger tightened on the gun. Don smoked his cigar and looked straight ahead of him, while Fame looked at the ceiling. Zara just smiled. What are you smiling at? Said Fame to Zara. Nothing, said Zara. Nothing, asked Fame. I was thinking, said Zara. What about? Asked Fame. Life, said Zara, smiling. Nobody talked or moved again until Inspector Roland came back a few minutes later. The boot of one of the cars is locked, said the inspector. Who's got the key? I have, said Fame. Give it to me, said the inspector. Fame gave him the key and the inspector went outside again. In a few minutes, he was back. He called the other 3 policemen, and they all hurried into the room. The inspector and all the policemen stood and looked at Don, Fame and Zara. Suddenly the inspector walked across the room and hit Fame across the face. Now, said the inspector, let's talk.